Support for this episode comes from Gvoke HypoPen. Now that Benny is on his own more and more, I'm grateful that he's open about his diabetes journey and always tells his friends how to use his emergency glucagon, Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat a very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more, go to gvokeglucagon.com/Stacy. That's gvokeglucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke should not be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
This week, Qvin is a new company intent on prioritizing women's health, and they're doing it in a way no one has thought to do before. They got FDA clearance this year to measure A1C with their patented period pads. That's right, this is the first and only FDA-cleared menstrual pad scientifically proven to collect blood for lab testing. Featured in Time magazine's Best Inventions of 2024, CEO Dr. Sara Naseri tells me this is just the start of what they want to do for women's health autonomy. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacy Sims. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2 back in 2006. So yeah, he is almost 20 and he has been living with type 1 for almost 18 years. My husband has type 2. I don't have any kind of diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting. And that is how you get the podcast. I talked about the Qvin period pad when it was approved earlier this year. I did that in one of our In the News episodes. But I didn't realize how revolutionary this really is. I mean, let's be honest, I don't think many of us actually think that much about period blood, even those of us who have had to live with it most of our lives. And yes, by the way, if you haven't realized, we are going there this episode. So if this is not for you, you can log off now. But I would really urge you to stick around. This is super interesting. And it's also kind of surprising how little we know. You're going to hear CEO and founder Dr. Sara Naseri talk about how nobody has looked at menstrual blood to see if it can be used in lab testing, like a blood draw that we've all had in a lab or a doctor's office. She got that done in 2019, just 5 years ago. That's when they figured out that they didn't have to throw it away. It wasn't a waste product. It could be tested. And part of the story here involves crime scene evidence. So you will want to stick around, I promise. As I said, it's been featured in Time magazine's list of Best Inventions of 2024, and it's available now. We're going to go through all of the information in the interview. I will link up their website. It is also FSA and HSA eligible. And like I said in the opening tease there, it sounds like this is really just the start for Qvin. They have some pretty big plans. Our interview right after this. I love when I don't have to deal with a faraway mail order system, when I can just pick up diabetes supplies from the pharmacy. Omnipod is the only tubeless full-feature insulin pump available through the pharmacy. It makes it simple to pick up pods and insulin in the same place, and you avoid those high startup costs from traditional tubed insulin pumps. You simply pay as you pod. Remember, pharmacy means no commitment, and pharmacy means you can switch now, even if your tubed pump is under warranty. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Sara, welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm really glad to have you here. I'm really interested in this topic. Thanks for spending some time with me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Yeah, let's just jump in. I have so many questions, but I want to start, I guess, toward the beginning. How did you get the idea for this product? Tell us the story.
Yeah, and I actually remember the moment that I had this idea very vividly. it was kind of one of those moments where I remember just kind of the idea popped into my head and I just literally had to sit with it for like a solid hour and just be quiet, just thinking about why has nobody thought of that before? And so the background story is I was actually a medical student at the time. I had seen in practice and of course also knew from, in theory how important early diagnostics is for healthcare. Yet very rarely, even in my 7 years of medical school, was the focus really on the early detection and prevention. So that was something that was sort of top of my mind already at the time. There was almost an explosion in these medical devices trying to give us information about our bodies outside of the doctor's office with this intention of giving you data that would help us be more proactive and stay more informed about what's going on in our bodies. A lot of, you can monitor or track your steps, track your sleep, pulse, so these sorts of things, which is all interesting, but not always very clinically relevant. And so I wanted to find a way to get information about what's going on in our bodies regularly, conveniently, but that also was, could be directly translated to, high clinical utility. And so blood became a focus area because, of course, blood is the most commonly used bodily fluid for any diagnostics. And then the thought was, well, how do we get access to blood regularly, non-invasively, conveniently? And that's sort of when it just hit me that, hold on a minute, half of the world bleeds every month. Why has nobody used that or thought about that for clinical purposes? And then, the first step is you start looking into what has been published, what is the science what do we know about this bodily fluid already? And it was the shortest literature review I've ever done. There was just absolutely no
Wow.
published data on the clinical utility of menstrual blood in terms of how it could be useful for women and patients. And so that led me on a journey, very early on. It was really very basic questions around, what is menstrual blood? How does basic biomarkers correlate when you compare it to a venous blood draw? What is unique about menstrual blood and how can that be useful? And so it's been, kind of I would say kind of investigational at the very beginning. And then, once we learned that there's absolutely clinical utility here, then the next step was, well, how do you build a product that captures that in the most convenient way and that is accessible? Because at the end of the day, that is really what we are about at Qvin. It's about how do we lower the barrier for women to get access to healthcare. We know women are busy, right? They're a big part of our workforce, a very central part of our family units. And women tend to be more concerned about their healthcare. So you have a big patient group that essentially is increasingly busy, yet still very engaged and concerned about their health. They want to know what's going on in their bodies. So it's all about how do we give them that information? How do we lower the barriers for them to get access to information about what's going on in their bodies? And so the accessibility part of why we're building Qvin is actually a very, very key part of our vision.
A lot to follow up on there and a lot to take in. It's amazing that, as you said, the shortest literature review you'd ever done.
Yeah.
Amazing how little has been researched. What was your reaction? I can't imagine you were that surprised because I'm not surprised to find out that there wasn't a lot, but it's a little frustrating. It makes me a little angry, frankly.
At the time, it's kind of interesting because I actually wasn't aware of just how overlooked women's health is as a whole.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware, 7 years of medical school and all, like, you would think that we would have known about that as part of that journey, but that was really not something that was brought up as an issue. So I feel like I've only learned that sort of after becoming a doctor and especially in my journey with Qvin. I've unfortunately learned that, the lack of, female representation in clinical trials, the lack of data and understanding about women specific condition, even I would say how, female specific conditions or conditions that primarily affect females are still being studied on male biology predominantly. And like how that really is a big issue for women's health as a whole.
Yeah.
And now you take something like, menstrual blood that is so specific to female biology. And so, knowing how behind we are in general, I'm not surprised that menstrual blood has been overlooked and has been under researched. And, you add on top that menstrual blood historically, religiously, has also been this kind of stigma, or, it's regarded as a waste product. Even today, women are not necessarily allowed to participate in certain like communions when they're on their period. There's still a lot of sort of stigma surrounding this very natural thing that happens to every woman every month, right?
Yeah.
And so you add all those things, then no, I'm not surprised. But I would say at the time, I was still rather shocked to see how little information actually there was, let alone where the research came from. Because the very first study that was published on the proteomics of menstrual blood, which was not very long after I started looking at it, was actually done by the forensic department in New York. They were looking at menstrual blood for very different reasons than
Like
I.
for criminal forensics?
Yeah, so there was, a murder case, and
Oh
the
my
suspect
gosh.
said, yeah, I mean, some of these, I feel like the journey that we've been on with Qvin, it's been very interesting, and we've just gone in places that I'd never thought I would go necessarily with something like this, and yes, I did find myself at the forensic department in New York early in Qvin's journey to understand what they had learned, right? And so yeah, they had a murder case. The suspect said there was bright blood on a couch, and the suspect said, well, this is menstrual blood. And we had no really sort of systematic way to kind of solve for that. So that's why the first study was published looking at, the proteomics of menstrual blood and how it's different. And then we then took that and built on top of that and really dived into it from more of a clinical point of view.
Wow.
So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, shocking how little data there was. I do remember feeling kind of taken back by that at the time.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I'm hesitating because this is going to sound like a dumb question, but I know it's not, because if I'm thinking it, everybody's thinking it.
Yes.
And the forensics department it sounds like the forensics department was answering this question, if I'm hearing you correctly. Is menstrual blood measurable in the same way as a blood draw is? In other words, like when I think about menstrual blood, I know we're going to get into it on this show today. So, I'll put like a little disclaimer on the front, but is menstrual blood the same? In other words, menstrual blood has other things in it, right? Vaginal tissue, things like that. Is it measurable in the same way?
Yeah. So what we know is menstrual blood is composed of, as exactly what you said, right? It's composed of systemic blood, right? So the blood that that you see in menstrual blood, that is effectively systemic blood. It comes from the capillaries that break during your menstruation. With that comes also endometrial tissue and vaginal fluid. So you do have a more complex bodily fluid, if you will. I would say the forensic perspective was really, they were just looking what is the consistent difference that we can, so we can distinguish between these two and solve for cases where this becomes a claim. And from our perspective, we're more looking at how is it similar. At least initially, that was the goal, was to figure out, well, how can this be a substitute for some of the very important clinical assays that we run very regularly for patients, for screening purposes, but also for chronic patients that have to come in regularly to get that done. How could we make that easier for them, given they're bleeding anyways? And then I think the other way to look at it is, okay, what are the unique assays? And that's sort of where some of this endometrial tissue and the vaginal fluid comes in. But in terms of if it can be measured the same way, the blood that is part of menstrual blood comes from the capillary, and in that way it is systemic blood, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. I mean, you realize how little you know about your own body. It's
absolutely.
remarkable.
And that's not at an individual level, really. Like the entire medical community had frankly overlooked what this opportunity could bring. And I think it's always been fun in some ways to speak to clinicians about this, because I feel like I even remember the very first conversation we had with the former head of OB-GYN family planning at Stanford University Hospital. And his reaction was very much, man, I've been an OB-GYN for 40 plus years. Like menstrual blood is a very key aspect of women's health. It's not, the very first question we often ask in an OB-GYN setting is, when was your last period? And he almost fell down his chair being like, I cannot believe we haven't thought of this before. Yeah. I think it is certainly about time that this research is done. And I do think we've learned a lot, and we've published quite a few papers on the topic. But even with that said, we are really just scratching the surface of what I believe is possible, and how this could be a key aspect of women's health and an opportunity to give more women access to healthcare.
So why A1C measurements as one of your first forays into this. FDA has approved this. This is happening as we speak.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're very excited that we were able to get an FDA clearance as the first diagnostic menstrual pad to ever get clearance. A big moment for our little team. I think in many ways, a big moment for women's health, right? A1C is an important biomarker for many reasons. It's a very common biomarker we look at in the clinic. It's relevant for, frankly, everyone, but in particular for people who live with diabetes, whether it's type 2, type 1, gestational diabetes, or for people who are pre-diabetic. And so, and it is a patient, there is a diabetic pandemic going on, right? It's a condition that is increasing, and it's at the same time a condition that can actually be prevented or at least mitigated with non-invasive and, lifestyle changes. So there's a lot of impact that we can have. And then, as a patient group or, people who live with diabetes, it is a chronic condition that requires people to come in fairly regularly to monitor this particular biomarker. So really what we hope to be able to do is to make that screening more convenient, to make it easier for this group of people to stay on top of their health. We oftentimes hear that people who are working hard to reduce their A1C and they want to measure it, they want to see that improvement more frequently than they are able to with the barriers that exist to get access to healthcare. Also, for some, it's actually quite anxious to go to the doctor's office, and you don't want to be surprised necessarily with what your A1C level is. So it's kind of having that insight feels empowering. And so you add that with the fact that, today people are busy. You don't want to be what the term sometimes I hear being used as like medicalized, and how can we make this fit into your day-to-day life? And it's so exciting when we ask women, what were you doing while you were getting your A1C tested? And it's like, I was picking up my kids, going to work, doing groceries. And I think that's exactly when I think about the future of healthcare, it really is about how do we make it as easy and convenient for people to get information about their bodies? How do we lower those barriers? Because this will make it easier for people to get tested. It'll make them more aware, right? It'll motivate them. And hopefully it will, at the end of the day, help prevent comorbidities that can be prevented.
It's interesting to think about, and when you talk about convenience, so many people with diabetes, especially people with type 2, don't see an endocrinologist, and they're very far away from a general practitioner. I mean, this product right now is through the mail. Far be it from me to say, oh, I think it would be great for this person or that person, because it's up to the individual, right? Whoever wants to use it.
Absolutely.
But I could see this definitely for people who are avoiding, for whatever reason, right? Because of the length of time it takes them to get to the doctor, the cost of going to the doctor, of doing it through the mail. But when you get the results, is there support? Or is this something that you then bring to your doctor for more follow-up? Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. When I think about our family's use of CGM and Dexcom, it's getting harder and harder to remember how we did things before. I mean, how did we manage when Benny needed something like 10 finger sticks a day when he was a toddler? We thought it was amazing to switch to Dexcom CGM when it needed to be calibrated twice a day. Remember that? Now, Dexcom G6 eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. We love the alerts and alarms, and that we can change them both for him and for us. A lot has changed as Benny has grown from a toddler with type 1 to a college student. Dexcom Share and Follow has let us help give him more and more independence. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
Basically, the way it works is that there's an app that comes with the kit. So once you receive the kit, it goes to your home, and you use the kit. You actually scan a QR code, which is where the app comes in, and it takes you through the instructions of how to use it. And then it also is where we share the results with you, so you can see what your A1C level is today, but also there's a nice graph showing you kind of how it's changing over time, which is really what's important as well, right? And then the app does have recommendations for next step, depending on where your levels are and also what your goal is, right? And then I don't think this should be seen necessarily as a substitute to talking to your clinician. That's never the intention here. And the app actually does allow you to very conveniently share the results with your doctor. So really what this is, it's a way for you to sort of avoid having to go in and get your blood drawn. You are bleeding anyways. Why not use that? Also sometimes some of the people we've heard from who've been excited about the QPAD is it's actually younger population that, they might be going traveling or they're going to the, another part of the country and they still want to be monitored and measured. And for them to be able to just bring the QPAD, get it, do it when they have their period and then share the results with their doctor. It allows them freedom to live and travel and do what they need to do because it makes it so convenient. So I think that's really kind of why we think it hopefully will, be a big quality of life improvement for this particular group of people.
We probably should have done this earlier, but would you mind briefly explaining really how this works? I mean, I don't want to dance around it. If you wouldn't mind, you get the thing in the mail, you use it as a menstrual pad. Just explain it if you could.
Yes. Basically, when you receive the QPAD kit, you'll find that there's we call it the QPAD. It's essentially a modified menstrual pad built on organic cotton. So when you receive it, it looks, feels, and is used like any other menstrual pad. The difference is that once you've used the pad, there is a little tab that you can pull. When you pull that little tab, it removes a small collection strip. The pad itself you throw out like you would with any other pad. But that collection strip is then placed in a little secure container that comes with the kit and is pre-stamped to a clinical laboratory where the sample will be analyzed. And so you put the strip in that container and then you throw it in the mail box. And then about, I would say on average, a week later, you receive your results on the mobile phone, on the app. So that's kind of brief, kind of what the sort of what the process looks like. I'd say it's very simple and intuitive. In fact, I feel like some of the feedback we got in the early usability study, which was all part of getting FDA clearance, we have to run a lot of, usability testing and see how this actually works when you're out in the field. Some of the feedback we got was frankly like, for women, it's like, well, I know how to use a menstrual pad. Like, you don't need to explain that to me. And it was kind of a funny sort of situation because there are these requirements for instructions in general and they tend to be very detailed. And I think this was definitely like some of these requirements were definitely over explaining and a lot of the users were like, oh God, this is a menstrual pad. I do this every month. Like, I know how to do this. And I think that's really the power of the platform is that it is so, so simple to use.
That's great. Do you see a situation or a scenario in the future where you wouldn't have to mail it away? You could do it at home, like a COVID test or a pregnancy test?
Absolutely. I think there actually one of the first solution we were working on sort of as part of the journey we've been on was actually a solution that could run the analysis at the spot. I think that technology is still early. Do I think it's possible and it will happen sort of eventually? Yes, I do believe that there is a path forward for that. Our very first patent talks about this particular solution there. So it's something that we've thought a lot about. But in this moment in time, we're really taking advantage of the analytical power of clinical labs. We're using FDA-cleared analyzers, and we are able to really get a precision that is incredibly accurate. And I think that's really kind of why we're starting with this particular way. And then the other thing is that it's exciting that, we can actually do more than just A1C over time. We've validated a number of other biomarkers that are relevant for women's health. And I think once we receive a sample in the laboratory, we really can do a lot to give you information about what's going on within sort of many aspects of your health, even outside of A1C, even though that's, where we're starting.
Can I ask for a sneak peek of what you may ask for approval next?
So absolutely. We've looked at and we've actually validated in a CLIA lab a number of hormones. So thyroid hormone being one of them, different fertility hormones as well. What else? We have inflammatory biomarkers, hemoglobin, iron levels. So really, I think, again, we are really just starting to see the potential of what menstrual blood can bring to patients, and these are some of the examples that we know work and that we've validated already in a clinical laboratory setting.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because when we're talking to a diabetes audience, I don't really bring up needle phobia that much because that's a tough one for people with diabetes who use insulin.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people in the population who, if they don't have to have a blood draw, they don't have to see a needle, They would
Yeah.
love to do something like this.
Absolutely. I think that's of course one of the benefits is that there is no needle pricking, right? And I do think like, whether you have needle phobia or not, if there is no need for you to get a venipuncture or, a needle poked into your finger, really we should avoid that, right? And so that's really the reason why, a lot of what we hear in particular in trials, the feedback we've gotten is that the appeal of this is also what is called passive collection. This is actually not even a term we had thought of, but some of the feedback we got from a study we did with Stanford Hospital, the fact that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to, wipe your finger or go in or, there's no steps here. Whether you want it or not, you're going to have your period to some extent. Your body does everything for you. All you're doing is wearing a modified menstrual pad. So that passive collection part of it, in the very sense that you don't need to poke with any needles, is definitely, I think, one of the pros of this approach.
Yeah. As you and I are taping in the United States right now, we have a presidential election coming up where reproductive rights has been a big issue. Many women are concerned about their privacy. I've talked to the folks at Tide Pool who have their period project, and they have gone to the point where they are storing all of the data overseas because they are concerned about the privacy for reproductive information in the United States. Is this on your radar? And is this something that you can talk to women and people, who are going to be using your product? Can you talk to them about this?
Absolutely. I think at any point in time, if you're doing anything in healthcare, of course, data privacy becomes key. For us, it's the very way we've built the platform and how we're storing, information and keeping data that could identify anyone separate from all the other data results that we're getting is part of a HIPAA compliant system. It's all something that we are, that's exactly how we're building the system. And I would say with privacy laws, with privacy policies, we are following the absolute standard in the US. We very firmly believe that it's a woman's choice at the end of the day. And if a woman chooses to remove her data, delete her data, take her data elsewhere, that is her choice. We do, as part of our mission, we do run a lot of studies as well. Part of the power, I think, behind the QPAD platform and why we exist is not just to give women information about what's going on in their bodies, but hopefully that we can collectively help to enhance women's health for everyone and for the next generations to come. And for that purpose, we are running studies and we are, looking at progression biomarkers. We're biobanking them and, really starting to understand some very key aspects of women's health through this lens. And for those things, women are absolutely consenting, right? You consent to that. And if you do wish to no longer participate, you have the option to do that. And so I think it really comes down to a woman's choice, right? Yeah. Does she want her data stored here? Does she not want her data stored? And then the platform will allow for you to make that choice. That's super important. I think anybody working in healthcare gotta have that as top of mind. Otherwise, I don't think it's going to last.
And finally, the company is pronounced Qvin. Tell me what so Qvin means woman.
Yes. So Qvin is actually, it comes from a Danish word, which is kvinde, which means woman. And it's really because both myself and my co-founder are originally from Denmark. So as we were thinking about, how to name the company, we were looking for a short word. And then Qvin came to mind because it has this connection to kind of where we're from and some of the values that the society in Denmark is built on, in particular around healthcare and universal healthcare and, really taking care of everyone in that sort of way is something that we really admire and we bring to our own company. And so that's sort of where this name came from.
That's great. And then before I let you go, Sara, it has to have been interesting. You've already shared a couple of stories about doctors and researchers who are like, well, I can't believe we never thought of doing something like this. What has been the response and the reaction since the FDA approval? It's been almost a year. And what has it been like for you?
Generally speaking, I think there has been a shift in the conversation. And I would say the FDA clearance, of course, puts that final stamp of approval. Menstrual blood is not a waste product. It absolutely has clinical utility. And that helps, in conversations. But I would say maybe even before that, as we started to publish and publish research and data, peer-reviewed studies, I will say that we've seen that change from being, perhaps skepticism to excitement. And now the conversation is less about, oh, I don't think this is going to work or this is kind of icky. We've had some of those. However, now it's no longer about what you or I believe, really. It's about the data, right? And once we get past that barrier of personal opinion, which really shouldn't be present when we think about healthcare, and we can start to talk about how can this be useful for our patients. And we've seen that shift. It's a very refreshing shift. And I think it came with publications early on, but certainly the FDA clearance has put that final stamp of approval on this opportunity and the value that it can have for patients.
That's great. Well, Sara, I really appreciate you spending so much time with me and explaining all of this. I am sure we will talk again. And I really look forward to learning more about Qvin and the product. So thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait to see what you guys do next. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. Thanks for having me. Thank you for having the conversation. Really, really appreciate it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Qvin, just go to diabetes-connections.com. It was so interesting to talk to her and just interesting to learn more about this product. Full disclosure, and maybe this is a little TMI for some people, but the company did offer me the opportunity to test the Qvin period pad. But I don't live with diabetes, and frankly, I'm pretty much in menopause, so it wasn't going to work for me. But I did connect Sara with some other folks, and I will definitely keep you posted on what those women have to say about their experience. If you use this, let me know. I am really interested in learning more, and I'll definitely keep you posted. All right, while I have you here, Mom's Night Out, I'm always telling you about our next places and where we're going. We'll be in Atlanta at the end of January, and all the information, just stay up to date. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Mom's Night Out tab. The best way to stay up to date is to sign up for our emails. You can do that right on the website, or you can always reach out to me, Stacey, at diabetes-connections.com, and I'll let you know what's up. All right, thanks to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
You've worked hard your whole life. Diabetes management shouldn't slow you down. EdgePark is your trusted go-to supplier for all things diabetes management supplies and continuous glucose monitors, like Medtronic's Guardian sensor, Dexcom G7, and the Freestyle Libre 3. EdgePark accepts most insurance plans, including select coverage for Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans, and EdgePark navigates insurance complexities for you and handles the paperwork. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the EdgePark logo.